Hello, everyone. I am so excited to introduce you to Nicole from Seattle Kids Yoga. I've known about Nicole for years, and this is the first time we really got to sit down and have a proper chat. So I'm really excited for you to meet her. She has kids yoga teachers all across the area in Seattle, and she's going to tell us all about it and how she started and built her business. So, welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And let's start with your background. What's your background, your passion, and how did you come to be where you are now? How did you build this monstrosity of Seattle Kids Yoga?
Well, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Um, and yeah, how did I get here? Well, it's been a while. I started teaching yoga to kids and families in 2002. So I can do that math. That was 22 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, when, I feel like I was just a kid myself. That was actually the year that I started practicing as an occupational therapist. I just graduated from OT school. I had my first job. And it was actually the year that I got serious, I'd say, about my yoga practice. I just found a studio that I loved and I went to class all the time. And so I became really passionate about yoga, but I was also really passionate about my work as an occupational therapist. And at the time, I was working at a preschool primarily for children with disabilities. And I started thinking while I was in yoga class, the thing you're not supposed to do. I was like, these poses that we're doing and breathing that we're doing, this all supports sensory processing. This all supports motor skills. So while I was doing my personal practice, I was thinking about things like, when I'm in downward facing dog, we're strengthening the muscles of the hand. I can just bring this into my work as an OT. And I did. And I started without going to any teacher training, because this was like, the time before social media. I didn't actually
Right.
know that kids yoga teacher trainings existed. And I just started sharing yoga with children from what I knew as an OT and what I was experiencing in my personal practice. And that just grew over the years. I moved to Seattle soon after that, worked as an OT for Seattle Public Schools for a number of years, and started to build my own business, teaching at studios, teaching in the community, until about 10 years ago when I left and became fully self-employed. And then about 6 years ago, started Seattle Kids Yoga from my pre-existing kids yoga business. Currently, Seattle Kids Yoga has about 10 instructors who are teaching about 70 weekly classes, and most of those classes are in schools, which is what I'm
Amazing.
really passionate about, and I'll
Yeah.
speak more to that in a moment. Most of the 70 classes are in schools, and so we're reaching about 600 kids a week.
That's amazing. That is just
I know,
so, so amazing.
I know. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for saying that. And that is
No,
a passion that all kids, regardless of background or race or ability, just all kids have access to yoga. And so
mm,
bringing it into the schools, especially during the school day,
yeah.
um, kids whose parents or grown-ups couldn't, for whatever reason, access classes at a studio, those kids get to practice yoga as well. And so
Awesome.
um, that's what I'm really passionate about. That's part of Seattle Kids Yoga's mission and vision, is that all kids have access to yoga and mindfulness.
Awesome. I want to highlight something you're saying here, Nicole.
Yeah.
I love this trifecta. Okay, so we've got people who practice yoga, right? That have their own practice for a long time. You've got that, right? You've been doing this for decades. You also have your OT, your occupational therapy background. So we have occupational therapists in our world, our community, who are interested in bringing yoga, and they're still learning how to do that.
Mhm.
And then the third thing you have is your kids yoga teacher training. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that those three things together, we don't often see those
Mm.
three things together. You might have a personal practice, but you want to dabble in kids yoga, or you might be an OT and you work with children but don't know how to do that, or maybe have your own practice but haven't done a training. You know what I mean? So I think it's those three pieces that really has shown your credibility, has
Mm.
come through in your expertise and what you're doing and how you're hiring your
Yeah.
teachers, right? And your practice of what you're presenting to the schools, right? It's hard. It can be hard sometimes to get into schools. And as a former teacher, I get that. There's a certain subculture we have within the education world. But because you have that additional training, I think that's really helped you to get into schools. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think a lot of it is like knowing the education world and
Yeah.
knowing the public school world, which is different from location to location, but there are things that are true for most school districts. Teachers are overworked. They don't want to add something new in. They want the quick fix or so in terms of that, yes, I know how to speak to that language.
Yes.
And
And yeah, let's go back to that sensory processing, because as a teacher too, right? Everything has to fit educational standards, and we have to target the health and wellness of children, especially right now, right? And so you're speaking to teachers about sensory processing. What are you telling teachers, for example, or administration, are the benefits of how yoga mindfulness can specifically affect essentially sensory processing of children?
Yeah. Oh, I love speaking about this. So yoga and mindfulness in themselves, without doing anything special, are sensory rich activities. They're
Mm,
providing the big three. And I know that you have done one of these interviews with one of the therapists from Inspired Treehouse, which is a resource that I recommend to everyone. The big three: proprioceptive input, so your body sense input; vestibular input, that's your movement sense; and then tactile, which is touch. And so yoga is providing all of that sensory input just as is. And
yeah,
so that can lead to an integrated sensory system, which can shows up as children being um, ready to learn, ready to
yeah,
play,
yeah,
ready to be a good friend. And it really is, and this is always where it gets tricky, because sensory, a system that is moving towards integration or is, almost fully integrated, that is when a child just can be their best self
mm,
and can be the happiest and can be the
mm,
most successful in school. But it's sometimes hard to get people to buy into that because it's like the foundation. And then sometimes we see schools, educators, just trying to build upon a foundation that isn't set yet.
mm,
And so just by going in and teaching a 20, 30, 45-minute yoga class, kids who are your sensory seekers who want more input,
yes,
those are the kids that are touching
yes,
everything. Those are the
yes,
kids who are talking
mm,
and always have something to say, who just like want more input, want more movement. They can get that, and I'll share a tip after I talk about the next type of sensory kids, which are those avoiders who like don't want the input, they
yeah,
don't want the touch, um, they don't like up and down movement or spinning
mm,
movement. And when you're teaching, and this is how I recommend anyone that's teaching yoga to kids teaches, if you're teaching in a child directed,
yeah,
trauma sensitive way, giving kids choices, giving options, leaving the room for kids to explore what feels best for their body and their mind, then kids can get the sensory input they feel most comfortable with, or what
Mhm.
they're seeking out to organize their sensory system. So then kids will go back to class or continue on with their school day or even the next day with a more grounded, calm, organized way of being.
Yeah. This is why I think this conversation is so important, Nicole, because don't you think that so many of us have big passions and big ideas, and you might be someone who comes, wants a career change, and you take a kids yoga training that could be like a 20 hours, right? And then you jump into a kids yoga class. Amazing. I mean, we're all about you got to start somewhere, and every bit of planting seed is amazing. But these conversations are so important because it's helping us like peel that onion to
Mm,
understand there's so much more going on in a yoga class, and that's our responsibility as holding the space. And we hear all the time, and I'm sure you do too, where instructors will say, well, what do we do when a child's not paying attention, right? Or what do we do if a child's rolling up or whatever, in a mat, and there's so much more that you can learn about that child and sort of like what's under the surface.
yeah.
Because I my daughter started to go to OT a few years ago, and I didn't really understand entirely what OT was, and so I myself am still learning, right? You still, no matter if you've got a master's of education or whatever, it's we're constantly learning. There's so much more brain research coming out now too. So this is the thing that isn't common knowledge, and it also reminds me, Nicole, of like as a teacher, we learned about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, right? So
Mm,
for when you're speaking about that, I think about the visual and the kinesthetic. So there are some similarities there,
sure. Yeah.
but what you're talking about, I feel like is just deeper, right? It's a deeper awareness of
It's a
sensory.
it's a deeper awareness. And I was actually just
Mm.
thinking about this. I was walking my dog, Edith, before we hopped on this interview. And I was thinking about how like, sometimes I've been talking about this for 20 plus years now. And really feel like I have mm, a fairly good way of explaining it and can really talk to different scenarios and children's needs and situations. And then I was thinking about how I was like, okay, so when I talk to Giselle, I gotta tone it down. I gotta actually like come in with like these practical applications because
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't matter how much you know. What it really is about is like slowing down and
Mm.
connecting with the children that you're teaching, like seeing them, taking a moment to be
Yeah.
like, ah, so and so is rolling up in their mat. Instead of being like,
Yeah.
oh God, like they don't want to be participating in yoga,
Right.
like the teacher's going to be upset, but just
That's
taking that as an observation, like so
yeah.
and so is doing that, they want, they're looking for like that deep pressure input. So you don't have to be an occupational therapist. You don't need all this knowledge in sensory integration or sensory processing to implement um, different things into your classes or at home with your children in this way.
Right, right. And I think also what you're speaking about, I think it's important for us to realize our
Yeah.
own sensory systems and what our preferences are, right? And so that we can then be more empathetic to what the sensory are. But like my daughter and I are complete opposites, right? And that's good for me to notice. The more I learn
Yeah.
about her, I'm learning about myself, right? So
Oh my
that's
God.
important. So let's think
The other
about,
day I was pumping gas and like one of those like the commercial thing was playing at the gas station. Like I could not focus on the task at hand because of
right,
the auditory background.
right.
There's my sensory need right there. Like something that I've done, hundreds, thousands of times, put gas in my car. I
Yeah,
get to a gas station that's like this loud voice and I'm like,
yeah.
turn this down. And so yeah, recognizing your own sensory preferences. And then also in terms of like connecting with the kids, I also want to say this, that's when your mindfulness yoga practice comes in to support you as the instructor or you as the one that is delivering the class or content to
Yeah.
be able to pause and not get like so
Mm.
in your head about it.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's dive into practical. We got it. We understand we have to be looking at these at sensory processing in the classroom.
Yeah.
So what have you found are practical ideas that you can use in your
Mm,
classes right now, tomorrow, to
okay.
get started?
So I bet so many kids yoga teachers are already doing a lot of these things. And so maybe this is just going to give you, well, some new ideas possibly, but also some little tips as to why you're doing it. So the first thing I want to talk about here is walking like different animals. Okay. So you're practicing downward dog.
Right.
Walk like a dog. And you'll see some kids will be hesitant to do so. They'll maybe want to stay on their mat. That's just fine. You can set it up in a scenario of like, we're going to walk like a dog or walk like a cat. You can stay on your mat or you can move off your mat. And you'll see some kids that will just like take off right off their mat. Those are your sensory seekers. They're like, they want more. But it's not just a free for all. You're going to walk like a dog and then you're going to pause in downward dog. You're going to hold it for 2 to 3 breaths and then you do it again. You're going to walk fast. You're going to walk slow. And this is for, you can do this in cat and cow. You're going to want to be doing it on all fours. So whether that's on your hands and feet or hands and knees, reverse tabletop is another pose that you can do this in, but you're getting that strong proprioceptive body sense input and vestibular movement input and tactile because you're moving around on different surfaces. If you don't have room, you can, I like to say you can still do this. I mean, you just walk forward a little bit, you walk backwards a little bit, you walk forward a little bit, you walk backwards a little bit. Okay. So adding movement to any pose. And again, I bet most kids yoga teachers are doing this. You're hopping like a frog. That's vestibular input. But then if you're seeing kids get overstimulated by this, that's when you pause in your child's pose or you just pause in downward dog, you take breaths. You just want to be aware that you're not taking sensory input and turning it into overstimulation. Okay, so again, it's just being aware, watching what's happening. This next one is one that actually a teacher of mine just reminded me of this yesterday. I call it safe falling. So the kids that just want to fall in balancing poses, like you see them and you're like, oh, I know you can balance. Like you're thinking this in your head, like, I know this child has like adequate strength and endurance for this balancing pose, but they want to be down on the ground. So that's again that proprioceptive input. They want to feel that impact. It feels good for their body. It feels good for their mind. And so turning it into an activity that I call safe falling, where you set it up. You're like, okay, so today, first we'll practice tree, and then we'll move down to the ground like a leaf falling from a tree or whatever. We give a water spray first and turn into a raindrop. So you're not going to give too much instruction. You're not going to be like, so if you're a sensory seeker, you can
Right.
they know what they want to do. Just who has like a fairly integrated sensory system, they're just have fun with it. Okay. This other one I like too, and this unfortunately works best with a hardwood floor. So like at a yoga studio, and I call it Cobra 4 ways. So first you're a cobra slithering and prone on your stomach. So slithering across the floor, you pause in actual cobra. Inhale, exhale. Hissing is amazing too. That long exhale is really organizing for the sensory system, nervous system as well. And then cobras, they get super silly. And you can do this with older kids too, and you don't have to use like the language of like cobras get silly. You can just be like, okay, next we'll roll like a cobra. So you get that rolling vestibular input. And like sometimes cobras bump into other cobras. Like you set it up so you like let kids know that they have their personal space, but it's okay if they a little touch here and there. And then so rolling and then spinning on the stomach. Okay, so that's that vestibular input. And then you go to sleep. You rest like a cobra and just let it all integrate into into the body. And just that belly down shavasana position, prone, just having that contact with the ground can also be really integrating for the nervous system.
I love this idea because I love that one, especially because it has the four pieces in it, right? And it's something that could be accessible to a lot of children, but also they could chat about after which one did you like the best? How did
Mm-hmm.
it feel? So that they can just start to become aware of what feels good in their bodies, right?
Yes. And then you become aware too, because of like what one they really liked. And again, it's like just that information gathering you can do as a kids yoga teacher. You don't have to have any of this like special background and certifications.
Right.
Um, shaking,
Yeah, right.
shaking the body.
Right.
And so I love to do this in feet to sky, like a legs up the wall position, and just allowing kids to shake as fast as they want or slow as they want or at whatever speed, and then just pausing and asking them to, or inviting them rather, to notice what they feel. Um, Not only is shaking great for any sort of anxiety like feelings, or just emotions that aren't serving you at that moment, it does provide that sensory input that a lot of kids are looking for.
Yeah. I love that idea too. I hadn't thought of that, being on your back and legs at the wall,
Uh-huh.
because then you are contained. Because I'm thinking, I'm trying to be a devil's advocate. Someone maybe newish to kids yoga, right? Might be thinking, okay, great. So here's Nicole. She's been doing this for 20 years. She's seen it all, right? Like, how do I actually do it if I'm sort of newish or I'm a little bit nervous and I feel a bit overwhelmed with all the ideas and I don't want my kids to go crazy,
Yeah,
right? Because you're talking about a lot of movement pieces.
yeah.
So, what advice do you have to those teachers that are sort of like, this all sounds great, but I have a lot of big behaviors, there's a lot going on, people are watching, and I don't want the kids to be out of control?
Yeah, well, you're not going to do all of these in one class for sure. I think it's, again, it's going back to like knowing, and like a lot of times when you're teaching like your first class, your second class, or you're adding something new in, you're going to start slow, you're going to start small. And so even starting with things like adding in lion's breath, okay, where you can see just by with one lion's breath or two or three whether kids are like, how loud do they get? Do they take it to this extreme? Like, are they gonna
Mm,
maybe get themselves overstimulated with it, or are they kids that are covering their ears? So doing some observation and then just starting slow. Like, what do you feel most comfortable with? And it's like, it's back to like what I teach in teacher training. You don't have to teach any pose you're not comfortable teaching. There's so many poses. You
right.
can teach the poses that you feel
Mm,
comfortable teaching.
right.
And it's the same thing with this. Like, if you hear like, oh my gosh, I definitely don't feel comfortable having kids rolling around on the floor like a cobra, well, don't teach it.
Yes.
There's ways to get that input.
Mm,
If you don't feel comfortable like having kids shaking on their back, that people might, think that looks weird and judge you, well, do something like turning into a waterfall where
mm.
like mount and bring the arms up and then fold, standing forward, bend,
Yeah, like a
come
jelly.
up,
Yes.
adding in a shake there. So
Yeah.
thinking about, everything on this like spectrum of like, how much input and your comfort level as well. And then, there's things that you might already be doing in class. Maybe you're bringing in a singing bowl. Just that
Mm,
vibration on its own can be integrating calming for the nervous system.
mm.
Um,
I
yeah,
love you. I love what you're saying there, because you're coming from starting from yourself, right? And doing those building blocks and going with following your confidence, but also kind of pushing yourself. And
yeah,
so, take once you've got your foundation and your classes after a number of weeks or a number of years, right? Is to take that challenge, to take that risk, to try something new. And if it doesn't go well, it's okay, right? It's okay. You'll go home, you'll reflect, you'll do your own yoga practice to get yourself back into balance, and you'll get curious about what worked and what didn't, and then try it again another way, right?
And it's almost like I'm thinking now a little bit more about this. Like, I'm definitely someone that's like, there isn't a formula. Like it's all a flow. It's all changing
Yeah.
black and white. But like
Right.
a formula could be that you think about your class, and there's generally say like 5 to 6 parts of a class. There's your opening part, your warm-up part, the part where you're standing, the part where you're cooling it down, and shavasana. And so like, what is like one thing that you could add in, maybe starting with one of those parts, and then maybe 2 of those parts, and then maybe bringing it to each one of those parts. And so, for the opening, it could be using a singing bowl, and it's just giving it a tap and saying, when you hear this sound, breathe in, breathe out. And so it's the vibration that kids are receiving. That's the sensory input. During the warm up, that could be where you bring in the animal walks. During the standing and balancing, or whatever you call that part, that could be where you bring in safe falling or a water spray. Yeah. And then during the cool down, maybe that's where you're bringing in like an opportunity for kids to roll up in their mat, or shake it out in a legs up the wall or feet to sky pose. Mm-hmm. And then in shavasana, I mean, for many reasons, I believe, and this is what I teach in my teacher trainings, we should be giving kids options in shavasana, that it's not just lying down on your back. And it's just a really vulnerable position, and just not best suited for all children, maybe given their background, or just what feels comfy for them. So always giving the choice of like lying on your back or lying on your stomach or sitting up. But in lying on your stomach, again, is that really grounding sensory input. Yeah. So there's just 5 ways right there that you can start.
I love that. So great. Okay, so let's talk about a story, because we love stories. So tell us a story, maybe a situation where you've had over the year a child that had some sensory processing issues, and you were able to use yoga mindfulness to make a difference, for example.
So this is actually about a sensory avoider. And often I think those kids are the ones that get overlooked, because they're just the ones that are like, no, I don't want the water spray. I don't want to touch the breathing ball. I don't want, I don't want the sacrum press. I don't want a massage. And oftentimes, well, I want to mention this, I'll see some newer instructors maybe take this personally. First of all, no, it's not about you. And you're doing that child such a service by giving them the choice to opt out. But so this particular child that I'm thinking of, they just, never wanted a water spray, never wanted any sort of sensory input in class. And one day, this kiddo's class came in. This is at a preschool. It came in from recess, and I'm sure so many of you have had this experience where like half the class is still out there, they're trickling in. Kids are going to use the restroom, all this stuff going on. And I was just sitting there waiting, and this kiddo came up, and he I had the water spray bottle. I would take my props and like put them behind me, and I had the water spray bottle, and he was like, I don't like that. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, it's just like, I was like, some people like a water spray, some people don't. And I was like, do you want to hold the bottle? And he was like, yeah. I was like, okay, here it is. And I was like, do you want to spray it? He was like, yeah. And I was like, okay. He's like, can I spray it at you? And I was like, you sure can. Sprayed it at me. And then I was like, do you want to spray it at yourself? It's like, yeah. And he did. And okay. And I'm not going to say then it was like every week he was like, I want a water spray. But soon after that, he started to become more comfortable with it, to the point where then, by the end of that school year, he, like, when kids were getting a little rain spray. Let me just tell you also, kids in the Pacific Northwest, you would think they have enough rain, but they will love a water spray, but those kids are like, give it.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the school year, he was totally comfortable with that. And it was really funny. The instructors were like, or I'm sorry, his teachers were like, it's so weird. He didn't used to like it, but he does like it. I was like, it's not like, it's so simple.
Yeah.
Yet, like, it's that, like, just building that trust in small steps, not taking it personally, and just connecting with kids. And
So
yeah,
true.
so I love that story.
I love everything you're talking about because you're not bringing something like it's not rocket science. It's not something completely new, but it's really like all of the practices that we have in yoga. It's about bringing intentionality, right? And that mindfulness of understanding the layers of a child. And we do get this, especially now with all this research. Was mentioning that we can learn more about the children. We can serve them a deeper level so they can feel good. They feel connected. So
Yeah,
things might look different now than they did years ago, where we had to sit, and
yeah.
we got in trouble or what, like that. But now we have a lot more breadth of understanding of children, right? And so I love what you're talking about there. So how do we connect with you online? How do we find you and kind of what's next for you?
Okay, well, seattlekidsyoga.com, and then also Seattle Kids Yoga on all social media. And I don't lead or facilitate anything online, but if you're in the Seattle area or want to visit the Seattle, I am leading a 3-day in-person teacher training in May, as well as a workshop on yoga and mindfulness for children with disabilities, where we dive even deeper into sensory processing. And that's a half-day workshop that's also happening in May. And I'll
And
say
you've
this.
written a book. Do you have
Oh,
do
well,
you
I
have the
have
book
a
with
book,
you?
yes. Yoga for little kids, which is such a sweet book. And I also want to mention this. So if you're thinking about, if you're at home, or even someone that has a limited, if you haven't taken a teacher training yet or a limited kids yoga background, I would highly recommend something like the Yoga for Little Kids book, which you can find on Amazon, or Yoga Cards, which Kids Yoga Stories has a variety of wonderful cards. Seattle Kids Yoga also has a card deck, and having cards for kids to choose what poses or breathing exercises or practices they want to do. These kids know what their sensory systems, what their nervous systems want. And that's what's going to lead to that greater understanding and self-regulation, letting them choose.
I love
Um,
that.
and then one more thing, I'm actually starting a second kids yoga company, Tucson
Ooh,
Kids Yoga. So stay tuned for more about that.
I
And
love it.
yeah,
Very exciting. Thank you so much for being here, Nicole. Can't
thank
wait to share with our community. Lots of tidbits to take away. Thank you, my dear.
you so much.